These are the players that average the most three-point attempts in the NBA. I moved my ugly face so you can pause it and you can zoom in on the names if you like. So we have three-point attempts, we have the shooting percentage, and then the column that's important is this column right here, which is the expected value of the shots. This is the column that is making all the changes take place in the NBA that we are seeing today. Now, traditionally, what you want out of any shot that you take, whether it's a 2-point shot, a 3-point shot, or the free throw line, is to shoot it at a percentage where you're averaging around 1 point per possession. 1 point per possession is optional. Okay. Now, if you look at the list, you're going to see someone like Steph Curry that is way above 1 point per 3-point attempt. He's about 1.2 something. And by and large, the majority of the guys on this list average over 1 point per 3-point attempt. Now, the purpose of the three-point line was to create space. As more and more players on the court shoot the three at a higher percentage, it's expanding the space that defenses are having to guard. In the 90s and the 2000s, you had a lot of 3-out 2-in sets, which were essentially you had three guards. You had a point guard, a small forward, and then you had a power forward and a center who pretty much occupied the same space inside the paint. The lane was pretty crowded, and you had guys like Shaq who were just phenoms and just had great size and that can control the game by playing inside the paint and now allowing players to come in. Now in 2010, the Orlando Magic had a bunch of injuries on their team and they had to play Rashard Lewis at the power forward spot. And what Rashard Lewis did that year was he was able to go outside into the perimeter and hit the 3-point shot. That and some of the most revolutionary spacing has taken place by moving guys away from free throw line extended and dropping them down to the corners. And so that has maximized the amount of space that players are working with. But at the same time, you have some outdated rules that were put in place to open up the key, such as like players cannot be in the key for 3 seconds or more. So on the defensive side, you have players who are essentially jumping in and out of the key because they can't be in there to protect the rim. The NBA also added the restricted area arc, which stipulates that in order for you to take a charge, you have to be outside of that restricted area, outside of those dots. A bunch of rules were added later to emphasize freedom of movement. Essentially, what they wanted was less physicality on the perimeter with the guards. And when you combine all of these changes, as well as the change from the power forward to being a stretch forward to now essentially just being a forward that can shoot, and then you also add the restrictedness of in terms of bigs and what they're able to do in the paint on the defensive side, what you have gone in the NBA is essentially a higher dependence on the 3-point shot because it generates more than a 2-point shot, even if that 3-point shot is shot at a lower percentage. And so now the game has become a 3-point shooting game and people are upset over what has happened. And they're looking at ridiculous changes, such as like getting rid of the corner three as a solution to changing the game. And look, I'm a defensive-minded guy. I was a defensive-minded coach when I coached. And to see these changes take place just handcuff the defense and makes it very difficult for the defense to play. And I saw the advantages myself of going to a 4-out 1-in offense when we ran Wahlberg's system over at Santa Monica, and we played against some of the LA most athletic teams, and we were able to play them tough just because of our offensive spacing and our philosophy of shooting threes and layups and not shooting the mid-range shot. But our offense was a continuity offense. It was a read and react offense with principles, and you had to make reads. And once those reads were made, that initiated a chain reaction of other things that needed to take place on the court that generated other movement. And the style of basketball that was played was beautiful, but we didn't have the 3-second rule for big men. It was high school basketball, even in college basketball. You don't have that rule of a guy has to be dancing in the paint and out of the paint. You have had checking rules that take place, but the spacing itself made it very difficult for teams to essentially lock up a guy that was handling the ball with double gaps or triple gaps that they had to play with. So in my opinion, what I think the NBA needs to do is just allow the hand checking. Allow for defensive players to hand check. Allow them to be physical. Allow them to put their hands on the offensive player and ride those players out, because you still have that spacing that they have to play with, right? Instead of getting rid of the corner three, get rid of the 3-second rule for the defense. Allow the bigs to just be in the key at all times. What are teams doing against bigs right now, right? They're putting them in pick and roll sets. And what are bigs? How are bigs defending the pick and roll set? They're defending it by doing drop coverage. They're dropping, which then creates a 2-on-1 situation that leads to a lob, a layup, or a skip on the three on the weak side. So just if you get rid of the 3-second element on the defensive side, teams are still going to put that 5 in a pick and roll situation. So you don't need that rule anymore. Get rid of the restricted circle. The charge is a very dangerous play. If the concern is players' health, especially concussions, nothing creates more head injuries than that impact that happens when the offensive crash into the defense and the defensive player falls back, causing their head to snap back and hit that floor, right? That's going to cause more. That's causing concussions. That is a danger. Get rid of the restricted zone. Get rid of the charge altogether. And if those rules don't change, then what you can add is essentially what they do in Europe. When the ball hits the rim, you can knock it off. If you want to emphasize more 2-point shots, then create a difference. A 2-point shot is allowed to bounce multiple times on the rim and can be touched. But a 3-point shot, if a 3-point shot is shot and it bounces the rim, the big or whoever can then knock that shot off and knock it off the rim, and it's not a goaltending call. That will force all threes to essentially either be a swish, otherwise they're going to get knocked off, and that's going to drive down the shooting percentages down if they're then knocked off, because there's no goaltending rule. Or it's going to make shooters be even better, because now they have to shoot the ball without touching the rim at all, and there's got to be a swish every single time in order for it not to be interfered. But getting rid of the corner three is just going to make it so that teams just sag and clog the lane altogether, right? Because they don't have to run out and defend that shot. They don't have to run out and defend that 2-point shot that is not being shot at a high percentage. Or even if it's being shot at 40%, it's still worth 2 points. Well, why are you even guarding that when the 3-point shot at the very top is shot with more frequency and is still shot with a very high percentage, right? You want to defend that more than you do a 2-point shot from the corner. So what you're going to do is you're just going to crowd the key anyways. So in conclusion, just roll back the rules that you put in place. Depend on your spacing that is being created, right? So don't penalize teams for having really good shooters in the corners, but give the defense some advantages by being more physical and not calling, little touch fouls that are being called. And also give the advantage to big men to essentially park themselves in the middle of the key and be able to knock shots off if they're taken from behind the 3-point line and they bounce. I mean, I just don't understand this whole idea of now you have to reshape the basketball court when the 3-point line is doing what it was intended. The purpose of the 3-point line was to space teams out. Teams are spaced out, right? They're spaced out all over the court. Fives are having a difficult time when they're being switched onto a point guard that's very shifty because they can't stay with them. And part of the reason why they can't stay with us is because there's no help side, because you have double gaps, you have triple gaps between the offensive player and the next offensive player, so that there can be no help. And if you do help, they kick it, and that three, it's just neutralizing it. So the 3-point line is doing what it was intended to do. What has happened is you put in place all these other rules that are now problematic. So roll those rules back. Allow for more physicality. Allow for more competition. Figure out a way to make the game advantageous for big men again, especially on the defensive side. So these are my thoughts. Share, like, comment. Take care.